Greetings from Hong Kong. My name is Daya Thussu. I'm a professor of international communication at Hong Kong Baptist University. And it's my great privilege and honor to be participating in this World Forum 4.0. I'm grateful to Ambassador Manish Upreti for giving me this opportunity to share some of my ideas with this very distinguished and very diverse group of people from different parts of the world. Since I'm a communication professor, my focus is going to be on communication in a global context, also in a digital context. I have a few slides to share with you, and let me see if I can, okay, they're there. So my emails are there, both my university email as well as on my Gmail, as you can see on the screen. So please feel free to contact me if there are any issues, any questions, any queries, any comments you might have on my presentation, which I have titled Bridging the Communication Gap in a Divided World. What I'll do in my limited time is to kind of explain in a very broad sense why communication is so important in this divided world and how we can help contribute to at least lessening the gap that exists between the developed world and the developing world, the global south versus the sort of, if you like, Euro-Atlantic world. At a time when we are seeing a lot of division, and in fact, as we speak, there are serious conflicts going on in various parts of the world. So since it's a huge topic, I'll focus mostly on Asia. And within Asia, also, I would like to speak a bit about the two most, the largest countries, China and India, and the change in the communication scenario there, and how that has an impact on global communication, and how that might contribute to bridging this existing gap. It is a truism to say that media and communication are very important, as I would say, central instruments for processes associated with globalization, as well as intercultural interactions, as they are the source of information, of understanding other cultures. Most of us do not have the privilege to meet people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different traditions. A vast majority of the world's population still gets its information about other cultures through mass media or social media increasingly. So if media are so important, who are the dominant media? I call it media flows, dominant media flows, mainly US-based. Again, there's a whole history why that is the case. But there's also a small but significant reverse flow of content. I've got some examples here on this slide: CGTN, the Chinese television network; RT, the Russian television news network; Al Jazeera; just in terms of entertainment, K-pop, Bollywood, Japanese animation, Brazilian telenovelas, Turkish television series, etc., etc. I just picked some examples. So the global communication scene is more complicated today than was the case even 10 years ago. And precisely because now there is digitization increasingly reaching the last outposts of the globe, because there is a mechanism in place for instant communication and global communication. So think for instance, an example like TikTok, which is arguably the most powerful short video format in the world, billions of users across the globe. And this is just creating then a kind of a society which Manuel Castells has called network society. And today it's a global network society, and it is increasingly a mobile global network society. And this society is to a very large extent shaped, influenced, controlled even by a very few hugely powerful companies, mostly based in the United States. I call them digital powerhouses. The Fab Five, Fabulous Five, of course, Google, Apple, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft. I don't need to labor this point how powerful they are, but just to give you a sense of what the scale of their market value is. So this is Apple's market value this year, 2022, $3 trillion. By way of context and comparison, Indian economy is just over $3 trillion. It is the fifth largest economy in the world. India is a country with 1.4 billion people. So here you have a private company which has greater market, almost comparable market value. This kind of overwhelming and truly global control of both the hardware as well as software of global communication has led to a lot of concern among many quarters, not just policy concerns, but also security, academics, etc. And market, how the markets feel that they've been taken over by these companies. Here are two recent examples of academic work which try to explore this, what is been described as platform imperialism. The first book was published last year by colleagues in Reuters Institute in Oxford University, and this one, Cloud Empires, is a very recent book, how digital platforms are overtaking the state and how we can regain control. These are just few of many examples of academic research coming out to kind of critique this new phenomenon. And most of this discourse is still very much in a Western context, because understandably so, because West is, and within West, not just any country, but the United States dominates the structures, the institutions, the market, the regulation, the control, everything almost. Because there isn't a mechanism to control or manage the internet. That's a very important part of the story. But I think the interesting thing for people who are in other parts of the world is to see how internet as an institution has changed, as an infrastructure has changed. Although it's a very American phenomenon, it was conceived, developed, managed, and continues to be dominated by the United States. But the usage of internet is actually now much more global, and the largest usage is in Asia. This is the latest available data, June 2022, and this kind of data changes by the week, but it gives you a broad picture. So nearly 3 billion users in Asia, the largest in the world, obviously. But if you look at the penetration rate, it is still below the world average. The world average is nearly 68%. Asia is 67%. So the growth is going to be coming not from the United States or Europe. These are already saturated markets. It is coming from global South. So, of course, Asia being the largest continent in terms of population is at the top, but also other parts of the world, for instance, parts of Africa, Brazil, Turkey, etc. There's a huge potential for growth. And within this more diverse, more multilingual internet, two countries are really interesting because of the scale and scope of change that's happened there. China particularly, because China has developed its own platform. So only other country internationally which has the kind of technical infrastructure in place to have its own system. So as you see on this screen, every major digital property that you and I use has a Chinese equivalent. And some of these companies like Alibaba, WeChat, etc. are now also operating in a global space. A few years back, I wrote a book on Chinese media, edited book, and I call this phenomena cyber capitalism with Chinese characteristics. But of course, Chinese internet is very much controlled, it's state controlled, even party controlled, but it is becoming increasingly visible outside the territorial space of China. The world's largest open internet is in India. And again, on this chart, you see how much it has grown in the last 2 decades. This is 2020 figures. The latest figures now speak of something near like 850 million users, growing steadily. Soon it will be touching 1 billion. It's also the largest user of Facebook and WhatsApp and many other mostly American networks and platforms. So these 2 countries are in some ways changing the internet in terms of what kind of content is traveling through those electronic superhighways, what kind of humor, politics, discussion, etc. It's not necessarily coming out of the United States or from the broad West. It's coming from very diverse cultures in diverse languages. And you can extend the argument to Russia, Turkey, Indonesia, Brazil, Egypt. I could go on. So it's interesting to see how many people are still not online. And as you see on this map, 1 billion people in South Asia are still not online, which is the largest unconnected population on the planet. So what is going to happen to the digital space in Asia is going to have an impact across the world, given the numbers involved. But it's not just about numbers. There's also a debate which has been going on for at least a decade about how the power, the pivot, as the Americans prefer to call, is shifting to Asia. That Asia is becoming increasingly important in the global geopolitical context and economic context. So some scholars actually, especially in Asia, prefer to call it not the rise of Asia, but the return of Asia. The argument being that until the 18th century, Asia was the most productive part of the world GDP. 60% of it came from Asia, the largest component from China, followed by India. Now, this is a forecast that by 2030, which is not very far, China would be the largest economy, followed by India, US, Indonesia, Turkey, Brazil, Egypt, etc., etc. The only European country which appears in that list is Germany, which currently is the 4th largest economy in the world. And it is not surprising that Parag Khanna, among others, have been talking about this. The future is Asian. My own work in this field has been broader than just Asia. I've been involved in a few projects about BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This is a book which was published in 2021, I think it was, and we were arguing in this that is BRICS creating a different global, international communication order. In fact, in that book, I have a short chapter, it's not that short, it's about 10,000 words, about how it might lead to what I've called de-Americanizing the internet, because the scale and scope of change that I indicated earlier in my presentation. So there is some tangible change in the digital space, which makes us perhaps rethink the way we have conceived the internet, we conceived the global communication trajectory. There's a lot more of this contraflow I mentioned earlier, both in scale and value and velocity. So just to kind of wrap it up, a few reflections about what it means and a few issues that I will basically touch upon because I haven't got a lot of time. How do we bridge the global communication gap? The gap does exist. As I indicated, You know, 40% of Asia's population, nearly 40%, is not online. Not 40, 39, 37%, which is actually, lower than global average. In many other parts of the global south, there are huge issues of connectivity and the quality of connectivity. As I mentioned, internet is still very much largely dominated by a few, usually powerful, unaccounted American companies. So there is a fundamental structural issue that we need to address, but there's also some change happening, and that offers possibilities of how we can bridge this gap. I mentioned BRICS, but BRICS beyond the BRICS now. There's Chinese are speaking of BRICS Plus and want to include Turkey and Indonesia and Argentina, Nigeria, even countries which are large population. Countries with a lot of resources, not particularly well governed, but the idea is to kind of create a wider grouping of countries which might be able to provide greater heft in international relations. Also, increasingly, there are debates about how do we protect our cyber sovereignty, what do we do about data, the trade in data and its exploitation is a major issue of debate, as is the issue of cyber sovereignty. And some of these southern states are actually taking very interventionist position on that. Digital Cold War, as you see, this cover picture that I've used in the slide from The Economist a couple of years ago. Battle for digital supremacy is continuing. Of course, mostly it's framed between China versus the United States, but it's a much wider debate. Increasingly, the weaponization of information that we've seen in various dimensions, most recently in the Ukraine conflict. And so it's fair to say that we are now entering a digital Cold War. In fact, you might argue that has been the case since 2018. And increasing use of AI for not just warfare, but also managing societies and economies. Digital for development. Again, this is a hugely important dimension for bridging this gap, because the gap is power related. The gap is based on haves and have-nots, as digital technology is increasingly being deployed to bridge that gap. So think of the mobile payment systems which exist now in many, many southern nations. In fact, last year, the mobile payments in India were higher than China's. And that's a huge difference in terms of what that country has been able to manage. By the way, on the basis of relatively cheap but efficient Chinese smartphones. So this is one example, but you could replicate them in various parts of the world where digital technology has been phenomenally successful in at least bridging the developmental gap. My final point, and this is a slightly reflective point, looking ahead kind of point, is that although we are, as some people have argued, entering an age of deglobalization, a certain version of globalization for which communication was a central part, is now coming to an end. We talk about deglobalization, decoupling, but at the same time, there is this incredible revivalism of nationalism, of ethnic nationalism, if you like, or racial nationalism, or religious nationalism across the world. And there's also greater emphasis on the civilizational history, China, India, Russia, across the Islamic world, Iran. There is a greater visibility of this discourse. And I think that's also an interesting kind of bridge in trying to explain to people that this so-called third world, South, developing world, what do you want to call it, is far more complicated, with very complicated histories and distinguished histories that any educated person in this connected world should know about. And I think the digital technology now offers that possibility of bridging that knowledge gap that exists in the way people think about Africa or Islam or China or India, not just in the Western world, because they are arguably in a privileged position, but within the so-called the global South, people in Brazil, their understanding of China or Chinese understanding of South Africa is relatively limited. And this is a good way of bridging that gap. On that note, I will stop, and I hope my slides work and you're able to see and hear what I've said. I want to thank you once again for your attention, and I wish the forum all the very best. Thank you.